Joining us today is J. Michael Waller, Senior Analyst for Strategy at the Center for Security Policy. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Well, it's nice to be with you all again.
Yeah. Well, the last time we had you on, it was in the before times almost. It was just a few months into the coronavirus pandemic. And we kind of talked about like how the CCP was using it for propaganda. 2 years later, how do you think they've done?
They've done a great job. The Chinese regime has weaponized the virus to make us really do what they set out to do 2 years ago, which was to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party wasn't held accountable, made sure that we viewed the Chinese Communist Party as a partner in fighting the pandemic and not a guilty party, and then to praise the Chinese Communist Party and even Xi Jinping for being so helpful and good to all of us to bring this to a close.
I'm still amazed at how many times I see in Western media, China's COVID policy worked. They did a great job. It's like they why is that? It blows my mind.
Yeah, well, it's remarkable to see the lack of criticism of the regime. They're saying you can round people up in camps, you can put spyware on all their equipment, you can give them social credit scores and weld them into their houses or make them disappear if they say the wrong thing, and somehow that's okay.
I'm kind of interested to see what will happen now that there are reporters who are kind of experiencing China's COVID policy. There was an AP article the other day because now some of the Olympic reporters are going into China's COVID bubble. And it was an AP article about how essentially creepy and weird it was. And I just thought that was kind of funny in a way, because from the CCP's perspective, I imagine they think, well, journalists coming into the COVID bubble, it's great for us because then they can't go around interviewing pesky human rights activists or whatever. And now instead they're writing articles about how creepy and authoritarian the bubble is.
It's really great to see because these are the journalists who are coming in just to cover the sports event. And they're not the ones who need to stay there and need to keep their party issued visas. So they saw what happened to the Washington Post and the other reporters who were thrown out. So the resident reporters might not do this, but the people who are not accustomed to Chinese ways, the party's ways, are coming in and they're really shocked at even though they've been briefed in advance. So it's really good to see this kind of reporting coming out because it reaches a whole new audience of people who are just interested in competition and sports and not in international politics.
I wonder if anyone in these media companies is doing like a double take. Like, wait, I thought this was so good, and now these reporters are saying it's actually not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, we'll find out what those executives say and whether the regime cracks down on them and any of the other interests they have on the mainland.
Well, so you said the Chinese Communist Party has done a remarkable job spinning the coronavirus into essentially a propaganda victory. But don't you think there is a growing awareness of the threat of the Chinese Communist Party and maybe even their influence operations around the world?
Yeah. And this is really the two-edged sword for the party. Your first question was, were they able to use this as propaganda? Yes, absolutely. But the second thing is, people are much more aware, especially as we in free societies are finding out we're not allowed to say certain things that are not the approved truth. And we're not.
I'm sorry, YouTube won't allow us to let you say that, so we'll have to cut that. I'm sorry.
I've been cut off. Okay. Well, I hope my organs go to some nice person.
Oh, wow.
That got really dark.
Hey, stay in your lane. Organ harvesting jokes are our business.
Oh.
Have a heart. Sorry, you had a point you were trying to make.
I'm not laughing at organ harvesting jokes, but it is kind of, weird.
We were a very special show.
Right. When you have big entertainment figures who might have a different opinion about something that's health related and they're being censored. And now a big podcaster, right? Joe Rogan and Neil Young comes and tells Spotify, all of your songs about rape and murder and abuse of women and everything else are fine. It's just Joe Rogan has a bad take on COVID remedies. So I want you to pull him off Spotify, or else you have to pull me, Neil Young, off. I mean, this is how crazy it's gotten.
Yeah, Neil Young with like 6 million hits a month and Joe Rogan with like 200 million a month.
Was it that many?
It's a huge difference. It was Neil Young did not back the right horse on that one.
The right horse, not himself.
Well, I'm referencing ivermectin, the horse dewormer.
Okay.
Talking about the horse with no name.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think like one of the interesting things about the approved narrative was actually something you talked about last time you were on our show, which was whether the coronavirus came from a lab in Wuhan. And at that time, it was definitely not an okay thing to talk about. People were pretty much ignoring it. And now there's been like a big reversal in, well, I don't know if in everybody's eyes, but the information coming out has become more and more damning in that respect.
Oh, yeah. But even if, I don't know if you saw the U.S. intelligence report from last summer.
Where they were like, we can't say.
Yeah, well, 17 different intelligence agencies cannot come to a consensus on the origin of the virus. And the unclassified report came out and said, we really can't know until the Chinese authorities help us. I mean, come on.
What are we paying them for?
If our spy services can't even come to an unclassified assessment of this, I mean, where are we now? This has simmered for 2 years. And for the first year or so, I mean, most people are going to go along and say, this is a dangerous pandemic. Let's not be divisive. Let's go along with whatever the authorities suggest. And then now they're realizing that it's really, people really didn't know what they were talking about, or even they were following the Chinese party's example on many things. And so there's a great degradation of trust of our health authorities and our civil authorities who've been imposing these often draconian measures. And people are comparing it to what the Chinese communists are doing. Even look at Canada, Australia.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about the coronavirus pandemics, because, we've found, people, when we try to talk about, Communist Party influence operations, it's always been, I think, hard for people to connect to. But with the pandemic, you very clearly see how the Chinese Communist Party was able to influence the narrative and continues to influence how we talk about it. The intelligence report is a great example of that. We can't say unless China says.
You know who's going to be a special guest at the Olympics? Tedros from the WHO.
Oh, boy. To get a gold medal in the lying competition.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, there's a case of a Chinese influence operation now, a party influence operation, where you have somebody like the head of the World Health Organization, this Ethiopian, not even a physician, is installed basically at Beijing's behest, and then just parrots the Beijing line. And if you trace what he's been saying since the outbreak of COVID, it's not transmissible among humans. Remember, he was saying that 2 years ago, and it might not spread that badly, all these other things, and he would not ever diverge from the party line. And all his statements are still up there. They're still on Twitter. You can follow them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember a bunch of global health experts were really upset because the World Health Organization delayed labeling it a pandemic for a long time. And health officials made decisions based on what the World Health Organization was saying. And in the end, that turned out to cost people their lives.
Yeah, it did. That and then the total dependency of even the United States health institutions on the Chinese Communist Party controlled institutions on what to do. We were all depending on the CCP for this. And for a month, they kept it secret and stonewalled and didn't admit to anything until finally Xi Jinping made a great speech and came out looking like the great savior of the world in defense against this terrible virus. But that's because they had to prepare a line for him to make him look good and to raise him up, to make him look not just blameless, but like part of the solution instead of the problem. And that took weeks to put together. So it wasn't until January 20th of 2020 that the regime finally came out and said, hey, this is dangerous, but they were still allowing international travel.
So this was a great example of the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations. What I find interesting about the Communist Party is how well they sort of understand American society, particularly political divisions. Like they were able to label any criticisms of China, or, trying to hold China accountable for being the origin of the coronavirus, they successfully framed that as, either far right or racist. And then that just got eaten up by American media.
Right. They know the knee-jerk response that those types of allegations always produce reflexively. But they've had a good 30 years or more to really refine their new openness toward the rest of the world, the peaceful rise of China. And the more we engage them, and the more we appreciate the special Chinese way of doing things, as if Chinese are inherently communist people who love being repressed. And so you didn't have much criticism of this. And then over the course of the decades, just think of where so many American and other Western diplomatic experts, sinologists, intelligence analysts, and others, who taught them in their universities and in their graduate program and in their language studies programs. These were academics who, in order to get their degrees, had to study in mainland China under Communist Party institutions. And then in order to keep themselves getting published in peer-reviewed journals and all the other things necessary for professors to do, they had to be always allowed to go back to mainland China and therefore get visas. So really never do much to discredit the Communist Party. And then they became the professors and the trainers, and their students and others would go into the diplomatic service or the intelligence community or the congressional staff or the military with this different understanding of China, that really it's not such a threat as the right-wing crazy, pro-Taiwan people say it is. And if you even look at the United States Navy and its Pacific Command, what was then called the Pacific Command, for 20 years, they were talking about really mainland China is really peaceful. It's never going to be a naval power of it to any significant degree. We don't have to worry about it that much. Now look at them. All those admirals are retired, but look at who has come up under them.